The Calvo threat emerges. Captain Rick stood at the helm of the UNS Horizon, a sleek starship orbiting the outer rim of Earth's defenses. His gaze was fixed on the holographic display before him. The room around him buzzed with activity, officers and crew working tirelessly to decode the latest message from the Calvo Empire. His face remained stony, but beneath the calm exterior was a current of disbelief. "They want us to do what?" Rick's voice thundered through the command center, silencing the chatter around him. Every officer's eyes turned toward their captain. Commander Voss, standing rigid at Rick's side, cleared his throat nervously. "It's true, Captain. The reports from the Delor outpost confirm it. The Calvo Empire has developed a new form of hydro-weaponry." Voss hesitated, his eyes flicking to the floor as if even saying the words would bring the horrors closer. Fluid-based chemical agents capable of devastating entire planets in days. The weight of the information sank in like a stone. The Calvo Empire was known for its ruthless conquests and terrifying innovations in biological and chemical warfare. But this? A weapon so destructive, so overwhelming that it could destroy Earth in days? It seemed impossible. "And their demand?" Rick asked, his deep voice steady but his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the control panel. Commander Voss swallowed hard. "Surrender Earth or face annihilation by what they're calling hydro-assimilation. They've already targeted us." The air in the room grew heavy. The Calvo had used their weapons on several distant planets already, each time wiping out civilizations within hours. Earth, the prized gem of humanity's reach into the galaxy, was next in line. The room fell silent as the crew took in the gravity of the situation. Captain Rick's face hardened as he studied the data on the holographic screen. It wasn't just Earth's fate hanging in the balance, it was humanity's future. Rick turned to Voss, his brow furrowed. "What exactly is hydro-assimilation?" Voss tapped on the holographic interface, and a 3D model of a planet appeared, surrounded by a glowing blue liquid cloud. The Hydrodominus, a liquid substance capable of infiltrating any organic system, plants, animals, humans. It spreads rapidly through water supplies, corrupting and reprogramming DNA on a molecular level. Infected populations are turned into Calvo subservients, slaves to their empire. Rick's mind raced. A weapon that didn't just kill, it converted. Earth's oceans, rivers, and even the water in the air could turn against them. It was beyond terrifying. And there's no defense. Rick's voice dropped lower, intense. Voss shook his head grimly. "Not as far as we know. Once the liquid enters a water supply, it spreads too fast. Traditional defenses don't work. We're dealing with something completely different from anything we faced before." Rick paced the command deck. His mind raced as he searched for a solution. Surrender was not an option. Humanity had never surrendered. They had faced extinction-level threats before and always found a way to survive. But this was something else. Suddenly, Rick stopped. "Have we analyzed the composition of this hydro-weapon?" Voss hesitated, clearly unsure of where his captain's line of thought was headed. "Yes, sir. Our science team captured a sample from the Delor site. They're still working on it, but it seems to be a combination of heavy water, nanites, and biochemical agents. Highly reactive but stable, until it comes into contact with organic tissue." "Have they tested it on humans?" Rick asked, his voice taking a sharp edge. Voss paled. "Sir, with all due respect, that's highly unethical." "I didn't ask about ethics, Commander." Rick's eyes blazed with intensity. "I asked if it's been tested." Voss looked away, his discomfort palpable. "Unofficially, yes. A small dose on isolated tissue samples. The results were catastrophic. Immediate mutation. The cells transformed into something alien." The room was silent once again. The weight of the situation bore down on everyone. Humanity's survival hung in the balance, and the only thing standing between them and obliteration was a decision they hadn't yet made. Rick's mind was spinning. connecting the dots in a way that no one else could see. "Just a few drops," you said. "Yes, sir. But even in those small amounts, it's unstoppable once inside the bloodstream," Voss replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain stared at the holographic model of Earth, his brow furrowing deeper as a wild, impossible idea began to form. "What if?" Rick began slowly, his voice almost a murmur. We didn't resist it. A wave of shock rippled through the command center. Every officer turned to him, disbelief and fear written across their faces. "Sir?" Voss asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Rick's mind raced as he elaborated. The Calvo designed this weapon to assimilate and transform. But what if we let it? What if we could reprogram it to work for us instead of against us? "That's insane," Voss blurted out. "You're suggesting we let an alien bioweapon enter our systems. It could kill us all." Rick's eyes gleamed with determination. "Or it could turn the tide of this war." The command center erupted in a flurry of whispers and objections. It was a gamble, an unimaginable risk. But Rick knew that playing it safe wasn't an option. The Calvo weren't bluffing. If they didn't act, Earth would be lost. "Have the science team analyze the sample again," Rick ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. "I want to know every detail about this weapon. If we're going to survive this, we need to think outside the box." As the crew rushed to carry out his orders, Rick stood tall, his eyes fixed on the holographic Earth. They had faced impossible odds before. They had defeated enemies more powerful, more advanced. This time would be no different. Humanity had always found a way to survive. And this time, they would turn the enemy's greatest weapon into their own. The unexpected solution. Deep within the bowels of the UNS Horizon, the science lab was a whirlwind of activity. Holographic screens flickered, displaying molecular structures and fluid dynamics as researchers worked tirelessly to understand the Calvo's hydroweapon. Captain Rick had tasked them with an impossible mission, but the impossible had always been humanity's domain. Dr. Elara Mathis, the ship's chief scientist, stood at the center of the chaos, her sharp eyes darting between monitors. Her once neat lab coat was wrinkled from hours of work, and her usually composed demeanor was stretched thin by the monumental task at hand. Rick entered the lab, his presence commanding attention even amidst the feverish pace of the team. "Dr. Mathis, what have you found?" Elara didn't look up from the screen as she responded, her voice clipped and focused. "It's worse than we thought, Captain. The hydro-assimilation agent isn't just a weapon, it's a biological invasion. Once it makes contact with water, it spreads exponentially. The nanites within it act as carriers, infecting every cell they come into contact with. Within hours, an entire biosphere could be transformed." Rick frowned but remained resolute. "And can we reprogram it?" Elara paused, finally turning to face Rick, her brow furrowed. "Reprogramming a Calvo bioweapon. The nanites' code is unlike anything we've ever seen. They don't use binary or quantum computing. This is something beyond our technology. It's closer to a biological signal than digital." Rick nodded thoughtfully, unfazed by the challenge. "But can it be done?" Elara sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Theoretically, maybe. We have to interface with the nanites on a molecular level, rewrite their core programming to make them work for us. But even if we manage to hack into it, there's no guarantee it will respond the way we want." The lab fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. But Rick's gaze remained unwavering, his mind already working through the problem. "I believe in your team, Doctor," Rick said firmly. "And I believe that if anyone can crack this, it's you. But we need results, and fast." Elara stared at him for a long moment, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. But she saw the determination in Rick's eyes, and something inside her clicked. They had no choice but to try. "We'll do what we can," she said, turning back to the data streams. "But Captain, you should know, if we're going to modify the nanites, we'll need a test subject. someone to expose to the reprogrammed version and see if it works. Rick's jaw tightened. I'll be the test subject. Ilara spun around, her eyes wide. Captain, that's insane. If it fails, you'll be corrupted, possibly even turned into a Calvo drone. I know the risks, Rick said evenly. But if we don't take bold steps, Earth will fall. I'm not asking anyone to do what I won't do myself. Before Ilara could argue further, the intercom crackled to life. Captain Rick, Commander Voss here. The Calvo fleet just dropped out of warp near Jupiter's orbit. They're making their move. Rick's face darkened. Understood. I'll be there in a moment. He looked back at Ilara. You have less time than we thought. Do what you need to. As Rick left the lab, Ilara's mind raced. There was no turning back now. They had hours, maybe minutes, before the Calvo would unleash their weapon on Earth. If they failed, it wouldn't just be Rick who was lost. It would be all of humanity. The bridge of the UAS horizon was a flurry of controlled chaos as Rick strode in. Commander Voss stood near the central command console, his face pale but focused. Status report, Rick ordered. Voss pointed to the holographic display in the center of the bridge. We've detected over 100 Calvo warships in the fleet. They've positioned themselves just outside of our long-range missile capabilities. And we're picking up massive energy signatures. They're charging something big. Rick's eyes narrowed. Their hydro weapon. Voss nodded grimly. It's only a matter of time before they unleash it. We've scrambled every defense system we have, but if they get that weapon past our shields... Rick's mind raced. Prep the fleet for evasive maneuvers. We need to buy time for the science team to finish their work. As the crew scrambled to follow his orders, a new message flashed across the holographic display. It was from the Calvo flagship. Rick's gaze hardened as he opened a communication. A towering insectoid figure appeared on the screen, its chitinous armor glistening under dim, alien lights. Its compound eyes glowed with malicious intent. Captain Rick of the humans, the Calvo leader's voice hissed through the translator, dripping with disdain. Surrender your world or witness its obliteration. Your primitive species has no hope against the might of the Calvo Empire. Rick's voice was steady, cold. We're not surrendering. The Calvo leader's mandibles clicked in amusement. Then you will die. Our Hydrodominus will cleanse your world, and your people will serve us for eternity. The transmission cut off, and the Calvo fleet began moving into attack formation. The time for negotiations had passed. Voss turned to Rick, his face tight with tension. Orders, sir. Hold steady. We're not out of options yet. Rick's mind was already spinning with strategies. They couldn't fight the Calvo head-on, not with their overwhelming numbers and advanced technology. But Rick had always thrived in impossible situations. Divert all power to shields and engines. Keep us moving and unpredictable, Rick ordered, and get me a direct line to Dr. Mathis. I need to know where we stand. Back in the lab, Ilara and her team were working at a breakneck pace. Data streamed across the screens as they ran simulation after simulation, trying to crack the code of the nanites. Come on, Ilara muttered under her breath. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, but there was no time for rest. Every second counted. Suddenly, one of the junior scientists shouted, "Doctor, I think we've got it." Ilara rushed over to the terminal, her heart racing. The screen displayed the molecular structure of the nanites. Only this time, the code was different. It had been rewritten. "We did it," Ilara whispered in disbelief. "We've reprogrammed the nanites." The intercom buzzed. "Dr. Mathis, this is Captain Rick. What's the status?" Ilara grabbed the communicator. "Captain, we've successfully reprogrammed the nanites. They'll still spread, but instead of assimilating, they'll strengthen the cells they come into contact with. If it works, we can use the Calvo's own weapon against them." Rick's voice crackled back through the intercom. "Good. Get it prepped for testing." Ilara hesitated. "Captain, are you sure about this?" There's no way to know what the long-term effects will be. Rick's response was immediate. We don't have long-term, Doctor. Get it ready. Ilara's stomach churned, but she didn't argue. She had no choice but to trust that Rick knew what he was doing. Minutes later, Rick stood in the medical bay, surrounded by a small team of doctors and scientists. The reprogrammed nanites were ready, suspended in a small vial of blue liquid. Dr. Mathis stood at his side, holding the vial with trembling hands. Once this enters your system, there's no going back. Rick met her gaze with a steely determination. Then let's hope it works. With a deep breath, Ilara injected the nanites into Rick's bloodstream. Everyone in the room held their breath as they waited for something, anything, to happen. At first, there was nothing, but then Rick's eyes widened as a surge of energy coursed through his body. His muscles tensed, his pulse quickened, and his vision blurred for a moment. Captain, Ilara's voice was panicked. But Rick raised a hand, stopping her. I'm fine, he said, his voice strained but steady. It's working. The nanites had merged with his cells, strengthening them, enhancing them. Rick could feel the change, the power coursing through him. And with that power came the realization they had found their weapon, the battle for Earth. Captain Rick stood in front of the large viewport on the UNS Horizon's bridge, his mind sharp, body humming with newfound energy. The reprogrammed nanites coursing through his veins amplified his senses. He could hear the quiet hum of the ship's systems, feel the subtle shift of the gravity compensators as they adjusted to his movement, and sense the distant thrum of the approaching Calvo fleet, like a storm about to break. His officers were stationed at their posts, faces tense but focused. Commander Voss approached, his expression lined with concern. Captain, how are you feeling? Rick gave him a tight nod. Better than ever. The nanites are working. Let's see if they give us the edge we need. The bridge crew was silent, waiting for the next order. Rick's presence radiated a calm resolve that steadied them all. Outside, the distant black specks of the Calvo ships were drawing closer. The Calvo were ready to annihilate Earth, to reduce humanity to dust. But Rick was about to change the game. Status on the Calvo fleet? Rick asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Mara at the tactical station replied, they're within striking range of Jupiter. Scans show their hydro weapon is primed, Captain. They'll deploy it any moment. Rick's jaw clenched. There was no more time. Commander Voss, have the fleet maintain evasive maneuvers, divert power to shields, and patch me through to the fleet. The ship's comm system beeped as Rick's voice was broadcast to every human ship in the defense fleet. This is Captain Rick. We've developed a countermeasure to the Calvo weapon, but we need to hold the line. No matter what, do not let them deploy that hydro-assimilation agent. His words were met with a series of affirmations from across the fleet. Humanity's last stand was about to begin. In the Calvo flagship, Supreme Commander Zexk watched the human fleet scramble with cold satisfaction. The insectoid leader's mandibles clicked rhythmically as the Calvo fleet approached firing range. To Zexk, the outcome of this battle had never been in doubt. The humans were resilient but primitive, their technology laughable in comparison to the vast might of the Calvo Empire. Zexk signaled his weapons officer, and the crew responded in unison. Prepare the Hydro Dominus for deployment. This world will kneel before the Calvo. As the countdown began on the Calvo bridge, Zexk allowed a brief moment of anticipation. In minutes, Earth would be submerged beneath a tide of water, its atmosphere and oceans transformed into a breeding ground for Calvo expansion. The nanites would rewrite every living organism, and Earth would become just another vassal in the Empire. But something strange flickered on the sensor readouts. The human flagship, UNS Horizon, was moving toward the Calvo fleet with increasing speed, as if on a direct collision course. Fools, Zexk hissed. Do they plan to sacrifice themselves? The Supreme Commander watched intently as the Horizon continued its rapid approach. Rick stood at the center of the Horizon's bridge, watching the stars blur as the ship sped toward the heart of the Calvo fleet. His plan was audacious, risky, perhaps suicidal, but if there was one thing he had learned, it was that audacity often turned the tide in battle. Lieutenant Mara, prepare the nanite dispersal system. As soon as we're within range of the Calvo ships, I want those reprogrammed nanites launched into their fleet. Mara's fingers flew across the control panel. Dispersal system is online, Captain. Ready on your command. Rick's gaze was locked on the Calvo flagship. That was their target. If they could infect the enemy's systems, their biological advantage would turn to dust. The reprogrammed nanites would flow through the Calvo fleet like a virus, not assimilating, but disrupting, weakening their forces at a cellular level. Elara, Rick said, his voice quieter as he opened a private channel to Dr. Mathis. Any updates on how long the nanites will last? Elara's voice crackled over the comms, filled with both hope and worry. We've made modifications to extend their effectiveness in space, but the Calvo ship's atmosphere and hull composition might reduce their potency. We won't know until we deploy. Rick nodded, understanding the uncertainty. There were no guarantees in war, especially not against an enemy as advanced as the Calvo. The horizon shuddered slightly as it moved into firing range. Calvo ships loomed on the viewscreen, their sleek, ominous forms cutting through the void like predators. Now, Rick commanded. Mara triggered the dispersal system. A cloud of microscopic nanites, invisible to the naked eye, was released from the horizon. They drifted into space, propelled toward the Calvo ships by the ship's trajectory. Seconds stretched into eternity as the crew watched the screen. The nanites vanished from sight, but the real test was happening aboard the Calvo ships. On the Calvo flagship, Supreme Commander Zexk felt a strange sensation ripple through the ship. His senses showed nothing out of the ordinary, but a growing sense of unease gnawed at the back of his mind. His officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and the organic walls of the ship seemed to pulse irregularly. "What is this?" Zexk hissed, his mandibles twitching in irritation. "Report." One of his officers responded, their voice distorted. "There is an anomaly within the ship's systems. Something is spreading." Zexk's compound eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The human ship had deployed a countermeasure, something that was now infecting the Calvo fleet. "Shut down all systems. Isolate the infection," Zexk roared. But it was too late. The reprogrammed nanites were working their way through the Calvo ships, disrupting critical systems, scrambling communications, and weakening the biological functions of the crew. The once perfectly synchronized fleet was now in disarray, their weapon systems flickering and shields failing. On the horizon, the bridge crew watched as the Calvo fleet faltered. Ships that had once moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine now drifted erratically. Lights flickered, and their shields began to collapse one by one. "We did it," Mara whispered in awe. Rick allowed himself a grim smile. "We're not done yet." He turned to Commander Voss. "Now's our chance. Target the lead ships and open fire." Voss didn't hesitate. "All batteries, fire at will." The horizon unleashed a barrage of plasma and railgun fire, tearing through the Calvo ships that had been left vulnerable by the nanites. Explosions rippled across the Calvo fleet as ship after ship was torn apart. Other human ships followed suit, seizing the opportunity to strike. The Calvo, once so confident in their supremacy, were now on the defensive, their forces crumbling under the coordinated assault. Supreme Commander Zexk's fury knew no bounds. His ship was falling apart around him, and his crew, weakened by the nanite infection, were unable to respond effectively. The human fleet, once nothing more than a nuisance, was now systematically dismantling the Calvo Armada. "This is not possible," Zexk growled. "We are the Calvo. We are superior." But in that moment, Zexk understood that he had underestimated humanity. He had seen them as primitive, as weak. But their strength was not in their technology. It was in their adaptability, their resilience, and their refusal to accept defeat. As the Horizon's final salvo struck the Calvo flagship, Zex's last thought was one of grudging respect. The Calvo fleet was in full retreat. Their flagship, along with most of their capital ships, had been destroyed, and the surviving vessels were limping back toward deep space. Earth had survived. On the bridge of the Horizon, a cheer went up as the last of the Calvo ships vanished from the radar. "We did it," Commander Voss exclaimed, his face beaming with relief. Rick stood silently, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. For now, the UN's Horizon floated in the vastness of space, surrounded by debris from the shattered remains of the Calvo fleet. On the bridge, the atmosphere had shifted from the frantic pace of battle to a strange mix of quiet relief and lingering tension. Victory was theirs, but at what cost? Captain Rick's eyes were locked on the distant horizon, where the last of the retreating Calvo ships had disappeared. "We held the line," Rick murmured, almost to himself. Commander Voss approached, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "It's over, Captain. The Calvo have fled. We've done what they said was impossible." Rick nodded, but didn't respond immediately. He knew the battle was won, but there were still countless questions left unanswered. He could feel the nanites in his bloodstream, like a silent hum, amplifying his awareness, but also creating a growing sense of unease. He was different now, part of something new, something unknown. "How many did we lose?" Rick asked quietly, turning to Voss. Voss's expression darkened. "Preliminary reports indicate that nearly 40% of our fleet has been destroyed. Casualties are still being tallied." The weight of that number hit Rick harder than any battle could. So many lives lost, so many ships gone, all in the name of survival. But that was the reality of war. Still, it gnawed at him. Every ship, every soldier represented a future that had been erased in the blink of an eye. "Send a message to Earth," Rick said, his voice steady. "Tell them we've won. The Calvo have been repelled." Voss nodded and moved to the communications console, but before he could relay the message, a voice crackled through the ship's speakers. "Captain Rick, this is Dr. Mathis. I need to see you in the medical bay immediately. There's something you need to know." Rick's brow furrowed. He hadn't expected to hear from Elara so soon after the battle. Her tone was strained, almost urgent. He cast a glance at Voss, who gave him a nod of understanding. "I'll be right there," Rick replied. The medical bay was a place of organized chaos. Doctors and medics moved swiftly between the wounded, patching up injuries from the brutal battle. As Rick entered, he was greeted by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the soft whir of medical machinery. Dr. Elara Mathis stood at one of the central stations, her face drawn tight with worry. "Captain," Elara said, beckoning him over. "We need to talk about the nanites." Rick stepped closer, his unease growing. "What's the problem? Did something go wrong?" Elara hesitated, then handed him a data tablet. "It's not exactly what we expected. The nanites worked, there's no doubt about that. They crippled the Calvo fleet, just as we hoped. But they're not deactivating as they should." Rick's eyes flicked to the screen. The data showed that the nanites in his bloodstream, as well as those of others who had been exposed, were still active, perhaps even evolving. "We designed them to deactivate after a certain amount of time," Elara continued. "But instead, they've integrated with your cells. They're replicating." Rick's heart skipped a beat. "Replicating? What does that mean for me?" Elara sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're not sure yet. The nanites have bonded with your biological systems at a cellular level. You're stronger, faster, more aware. Those are the obvious benefits. But we don't know the long-term effects. This could be permanent. Your body may have changed forever." Rick absorbed her words in silence. He had agreed to the experiment knowing the risks, but this was something entirely different. He wasn't just enhanced for battle, he was fundamentally altered. "How many others are affected?" Rick asked, his voice low. Elara glanced at the wounded around them. "Dozens. mostly those in the direct line of battle who were exposed to the nanite dispersal. We've started isolating them for further tests. Rick's mind raced, trying to comprehend the scope of what she was saying. The nanites had been their weapon against the Calvo, a desperate gambit in a war they couldn't afford to lose. But now they had unleashed something they didn't fully understand. "I need to know if this is going to spread," Rick said, his tone urgent. "If the nanites can replicate in us, could they start spreading beyond those already exposed?" Ilara shook her head. "We don't think so. The nanites were programmed for specific tasks. They aren't contagious. But they're also not following the rules we set. There's a possibility they could start adapting in ways we haven't predicted." Rick clenched his jaw. The last thing Earth needed was another crisis, especially one caused by their own technology. They had survived the Calvo, but now they faced a new, invisible threat. As Rick left the medical bay, his thoughts churned. His body felt stronger than ever, but he was now acutely aware of the price that came with it. He could feel the nanites coursing through him, and though they gave him an edge, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had become something other than human. He returned to the bridge, where Commander Voss and Lieutenant Mara were waiting. "Captain," Voss said, his expression serious, "we've received a transmission from Earth. They want a full debriefing on the battle, and they detected something unusual." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Mara tapped a few keys on her console, pulling up a holographic map of the solar system. Sensors picked up a faint signal just beyond the Kuiper belt. "It's not Calvo. It's something else." Rick stared at the map. The battle was over, but it seemed the universe wasn't finished with them yet. "Put the fleet on high alert," Rick ordered, "and get me a full scan of that area. Whatever it is, we need to know if it's a threat." Mara nodded and set to work, but Voss stepped closer to Rick, his expression clouded with worry. "Captain, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself." Rick met his gaze, the weight of the nanites heavy in his mind. "I'm fine, Commander. Let's just focus on what's coming." Deep in the cold reaches of space, beyond the remnants of the Calvo fleet, something ancient stirred. The faint signal pulsed in the darkness, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was neither human nor Calvo, but it had been watching. The awakening of an ancient power summary. After repelling the Calvo fleet, the UNS Horizon detects a mysterious signal from beyond the Kuiper belt. While Captain Rick grapples with the unsettling permanence of the nanites in his body, Earth commands the fleet to investigate the source of the signal. Scans reveal an ancient alien structure, dormant but now slowly awakening. Rick feels an eerie connection to it, as if the nanites in his body are reacting to the signal. As the crew approaches the alien structure, they realize that it predates both humanity and the Calvo. The structure begins to power up, hinting at a force far greater than either species could have imagined. Rick orders the fleet to stand by as they prepare to confront this new, unknown threat. The battle may have ended, but humanity's next challenge has just begun. The Ancient Ally Summary. As the UNS Horizon approaches the ancient structure, it activates, and a massive energy surge engulfs the ship. Rick and his crew brace for an attack, but instead, they are greeted by a holographic entity representing an ancient race known as the Etherians. This long-extinct species had once been the guardians of the galaxy, tasked with maintaining balance and protecting civilizations from threats like the Calvo. The Etherians reveal that their technology, now dormant, had been created to counteract weapons of mass destruction like the Calvo's hydro weapon. The nanites in Rick's body are part of this ancient defense mechanism, granting humanity the ability to resist and even reverse the effects of the Calvo's bioweapon. The Etherians offer a choice: activate the full potential of the nanites and become the new guardians of the galaxy, or risk leaving the universe vulnerable to future threats. Rick and his crew must now decide if they are ready to embrace this immense responsibility. Humanity's Ascension Summary. Rick and his crew decide to activate the ancient Etherian technology, fully integrating the nanites into their bodies. This transformation enhances their physical and mental capabilities, making them resistant to the Calvo's Hydra weapon and granting them advanced technological knowledge. With their new powers, the crew returns to Earth, where the Calvo's invasion is imminent. Utilizing the Etherian technology, they neutralize the Hydra weapon, turning it harmless. In the final battle, humanity's newfound strength overwhelms the Calvo forces, driving them into retreat. The galaxy is saved, and humanity is hailed as the new protectors of peace. With their role as guardians solidified, Rick and his crew prepare to lead the charge against any future threats, ensuring that humanity will stand as the defenders of the galaxy for generations to come. A New Dawn summary. With the Calvo threat neutralized and their technology restored, Earth embarks on a new era of exploration and diplomacy. The UNS Horizon becomes a symbol of humanity's resilience and leadership, fostering alliances with other interstellar civilizations. Captain Rick, now renowned figure, leads initiatives to spread Etherian knowledge and technology across the galaxy, building a network of allies and ensuring peace. The Nunlic's integration into human society leads to advancements in medicine, technology, and defense, transforming humanity into a beacon of hope and innovation. As Earth begins to thrive under its new role, the galaxy looks to humanity not just as survivors, but as leaders dedicated to protecting and advancing the interstellar community. The story concludes with humanity standing on the threshold of a promising future, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead.